L Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started, I have to give you a legal disclaimer. This podcast isn't legal advice. The Florida Bar Association says that I have to say this, but now that I've said it, nothing will prevent me from giving you an easy-to-understand overview of the disability insurance world, the games the disability carriers play, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. So off we go. I'm really excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking about nurse consultants, the role that they can play in a long-term disability case, what they do, and why you just might want to have a nurse consultant looking at your case and or participating in a not so independent medical evaluation by the disability carrier or plan. And we're joined today with our special guest, Shannon Fenimore. Shannon has an extensive background in nursing, and she is a legal consultant nurse. Welcome, Shannon.
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for having me.
Hey, will you tell us a little bit about your background and what you bring to the table as a nurse consultant?
Sure. Well, I've been an actual nurse for many years, over 23 years. And my experience and background is in multiple ICUs, medical, neuro, cardiothoracic, the emergency department. I've worked in in surgery, pre-op, post-op, and actually in the surgical OR. I've worked also on regular med-surg floors, step downs. Also, probably my most recent experience is working on the IV PIC team, which also involves the Code Blue team. And also quite a bit of home infusion, home care, and aside from that, medical device for about 10 years. And the most recent in AI with bedside analytics for patients. Along the way, I've done some legal nurse consulting over the last few years, but now do this on a full-time basis and see just a couple of home infusion patients on the side.
So that's great. You bring a wealth of experience, both from a medical standpoint and from a legal standpoint, to our topic today. So we're going to talk about three things. The first we're going to talk about is an overview of nurse consultants. Secondly, we want to talk about nurse consultants and what happens during a not-so-independent medical evaluation. And then we're going to open this up to questions that I get frequently from my clients about nurse consultants. So before we get started, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in a second.
Have you been robbed of your peace of mind by your disability insurance carrier? You owe it to yourself to get a copy of Robbed of Your Peace of Mind, which provides you with everything you need to know about the long-term disability claims process. Request your free copy of the book at caveylaw.com today.
Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. Now, we're going to talk about an overview of nurse consultants. And let me set the stage for a second. In my ERISA disability and individual disability practice, there are times when the disability carrier or plan will schedule my client for what I call a not-so-independent medical evaluation. The disability carrier might have a question about the diagnosis, but more often than not, they have a question about what the patient policyholders' actual restrictions and limitations are, because ultimately the carrier has to determine whether the claimant can, based on those restrictions and limitations, do their own occupation and any occupation. I find that independent medical evaluators who are hired by the disability insurance company or plan are not working for you, the patient, and they're certainly not working as an advocate to help you get the disability benefits. So I always think that there should be some protections. One of the first things I try to do is to get the disability carrier plan to agree to videotape the IME. And there are times when either the disability carrier or plan or the doctor says no. If that happens, then I go to plan B, if you will, and that's the nurse consultant. So Shannon, tell us, what is a nurse consultant?
To basically sum it up, it's a registered nurse who utilizes their medical expertise to assist attorneys in understanding complex healthcare matters within legal cases. So we're basically bridging the gap between medicine and law and providing insights that are crucial for the case development.
Now, in the context of a disability insurance claim, can you tell us what other cases that you handle? And then we're going to talk more about the actual role that you play in a long-term disability case. So generally, what kind of cases do you handle or nurse consultants handle?
Generally speaking, it's a lot of medical malpractice, personal injury, workers' compensation, tort, catastrophic injury, death, wrongful death, those type of cases.
Okay. Now, can you tell me what role does a nurse consultant play in a long-term disability claim?
So here would be some examples. Functional impairment with evaluating records to connect the claimant's medical condition to their physical or mental limitations, showing how these impairments prevent work. Consistency in the medical evidence, identifying the inconsistencies or gaps in the records that could weaken the claim or suggest how to address them. Understanding policy language to help correlate medical facts with specific definitions of disability in the insurance policy, such as own occupation or any occupation.
Right. So from my perspective, I always start out with the disability insurance policy because I want my client and any expert I handle or hire to understand what the definition of disability is. And so sometimes it's the inability to do the material and substantial duties of their occupation. So I also give the nurse, if you will, the definition of occupation. So you can hear from Shannon that understanding these definitions are really important in the beginning part of her role. The other thing she said that I think is really important is connecting the dots, and that's causation. We're not talking about necessarily legal causation. We're talking about medical causation. And by that, Shannon, we mean that the question becomes whether or not the person who has this diagnosis has a consistency with the symptoms and whether this is all consistent with the diagnostic studies. Would you agree? So assuming that you do agree, then what will happen is the other thing that's important is to have a nurse like Shannon look at records, particularly if we think there's a gap between what should be in those records and what's in the records. So Shannon, how do you help us lawyers, if you will, fill in those gaps between what may be in the medical records and what we nearly have to, prove in a case?
Okay, so here's a few examples. So I help the attorneys by breaking down the complex records into clear, actionable insights, identifying the gaps and inconsistencies in the documentation, sometimes even, a lot of missing or tampered with at times, and then highlighting how a claimant's condition impacts their ability to work, which is key to providing the disability. And so basically,
Sure.
it's translating the medical jargon into, legal strategy, saving, attorneys time and resources to build a case on solid evidence.
And of course, as Shannon has pointed out, what's ultimately important is to, once we've established the connection, if we need to, is to really address the person's functional restrictions and limitations. And ultimately, that, of course, is why generally the IME is being scheduled, because the disability carrier plan really disagrees with the treating physician's opinion about restrictions and limitations. Now, so what role do nurse consultants play generally, and then in a long-term disability claim? Do you attend IMEs?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Nancy, legal nurse consultants can, and I actually do attend IMEs.
What type of IMEs do you attend?
Generally, a lot of personal injury, of course, for long-term disability and workers' compensation are probably the majority of the IMEs that myself or a legal nurse consultant would attend.
And generally, how do you prepare for attending an IME?
We basically, depending on what the attorney specifically wants, but it would be interviewing the client beforehand of the things of what to expect, what not to expect, what can and cannot be asked in an IME, and what type of setting, what type of test that they might do for that individual, along those lines.
Okay. And I presume that you review medical records to familiarize yourself with the case and to prepare the policyholder. Would that be correct?
That is correct, along with some legal documentation, such as the demand letter, civil code of procedure that is sent usually from the attorney.
Okay. All right. So we've covered sort of an overview to set the stage for the next part of our podcast, where we're really going to dive into what happens in an IME and the role of the nurse consultant and how you should be preparing. So let's take a quick break.